Hello, everybody. I'm on my way to the youth conference, and I wanted to take a minute to go live and share something that God was speaking to me today through the Bible. And today the title is called A Warning Against Pride. We hear all the time that God doesn't like us to be prideful. And in Proverbs 16:18, it says, pride goes before destruction, haughtiness before a fall. So God likes us to be humble, and he just loves it when we rely on him for everything, and that we don't think that it's us, but it's God working through us, whatever we do for him. And so I'm going to tell you guys a story about a king, and he was a successful king, and he was a humble king that went to God to seek his guidance whenever he was going to go to war, or he just lived God and depending on God for everything. And there came a time he became very successful because he always went to the Lord for guidance. And so God blessed him and made him successful. But then this story doesn't have a happy ending, because he ended up prideful and God disciplined him. So I'm going to be reading for a minute. I'm going to be looking down. So listen to the story, though. It's quite a bit of reading, so I hope that this blesses you. So we're going to start in 2 Chronicles 26, verse 3 through 5. And it says, Uzziah was 16 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 52 years. Verse 4, he did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight, just as his father Amaziah had done. So his father was a king, and when his father died, he became the king at 16 years old. Verse 5, Uzziah sought God during the days of Zechariah, who taught him to fear God. So he was taught to fear God. And as long as the king sought guidance from the Lord, God gave him success. So that was the recipe for success, was him seeking guidance from the Lord. I'm going to skip down to verse 7 and 8. And it says, God helped him in his wars against the Philistines, his battles with the Arabs of Gur, and his wars with the Mennonites. The Mennonites paid annual tribute to him, and his fame spread even to Egypt, for he had become very powerful. So as he was winning all these wars and building his as king, he was gaining a reputation of being very powerful, and so he was gaining recognition now. All right, so let's read on. Verse 15, it says, and he built structures on the walls of Jerusalem, designed by experts to protect those who shot arrows and hurled large stones from the towers and corners of the wall. His fame spread far and wide. So there we go again. God made him famous. For the Lord gave him marvelous help, and he became very powerful. So it's saying this over and over again. So this is trying to make a statement here that it was God who made him powerful. And so now here's where the downfall comes. So again, this is a king who became king when he was 16 because his father died. And then because he was taught to fear the Lord, He went to God for guidance before he went to war, and because of that, God gave him a lot of success. A lot of success, and he was becoming famous because he was winning all the wars and becoming very powerful. All right, and so now we're going to talk about his downfall. All right, so start thinking about why would he fall. All right, when he was doing so great, something caused him to fall. Verse 16, but when he had become powerful, he also became proud, which means prideful, which led to his downfall. He sinned against the Lord by entering the sanctuary of the Lord's temple and personally burning incense on the incense altar. Azariah the high priest went in after him with 80 other priests of the Lord, all brave men. They confronted King Uzziah and said, "It is not for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord. That is the work of the priests alone, the descendants of Aaron, who are set apart for this work." And so in the book of Numbers, it talks about this, that God put specific people in roles for different things, and it was the priests who were to burn the incense. And if anybody else would go in there, they would die because that was not their role, and that was the Lord's sacred temple. But Azariah ended up going in there when that wasn't his role. So I'm thinking he probably went in there because he thought, I'm so powerful now. The Lord looks so graciously upon me. Maybe the Lord won't mind if I go in. Or maybe he didn't think of it at all, but for some reason he thought it would be okay for him to do that, to break God's commands. And he just went in there and broke God's commandments. And we're going to see what happens when he was leaning on his own understanding. Verse 19, Uzziah, who was holding an incense burner, became furious. So he didn't like it that the priests were correcting him, telling him that he's not supposed to be in there. And they're telling him to get out, and he gets furious. So that's that pride. He don't want to listen to anybody. But as he was standing there raging at the priests before the incense altar in the Lord's temple, leprosy suddenly broke out on his forehead. Verse 20, when Azariah the high priest and all the other priests saw the leprosy, they rushed him out. And Azariah had leprosy until the day he lived in isolation in a separate house, for he was the temple of the Lord. His son Jotham was put in charge of the royal palace, and he governed the people of the land. So he ends up having to be isolated. So he goes from this successful, powerful king who relied on God to a prideful, disobedient, stubborn king breaking God's commands. And then God corrects him because he wouldn't allow the priests to correct him. Instead, he got mad at them and wanted to fight against them, and so God struck him with leprosy, and then he had to live all by himself. So that just, if we break that down, somewhere the pride just didn't come in all of a sudden. Somewhere he just started, as he started getting recognition and fame, somewhere he forgot that it was God God that made him powerful. And he started looking at himself as though he was doing something great, but actually God was just using him. So that's the danger of becoming powerful. Some people want to be used by God. Some people want, I want my life to be used by God. But this just shows me that I have to be careful. You have to be careful when being used by God, for us not to ever think that it's anything inside of us, but it's all God. All the glory, all the honor belongs to God. It doesn't belong to us. We're just instruments, vessels that God uses. And when we're humble before the Lord, he can have us do these powerful things. But we got to be ready for that and always stay alert, not to think that it's us, because then we can fall, and the consequences of that fall can be very severe, and God could no longer use us potentially. So I think this is a good lesson for us to learn from Azariah. And like I said, it's God's favor that gives us everything that we have. It's not our own ability. And so at some point he stopped asking God for the direction, and he got off the wrong path because he ended up going into the temple to burn incense when that's not his role. So there's boundaries that we have, where there's specific ministries that we have, and God puts boundaries. And so he started to do something that God never called him to do, and that God specifically said it was for the priest to do. And so we have to stay within our boundaries also. And so it's just a warning for us to know that God is very merciful and gives us his favor, but he's also a God of judgment. If we are out of his will, then he can judge us, and we will have to pay the consequences for our actions. So we should never think that we're beyond God's correction, or just because we should never think that God will bend his own word because we think that we are something special. And so I hope that this Bible study was able to speak to you, and you can go and read the whole passage and the whole story in 2 Chronicles Chapter 26. And so I just want to thank you guys for getting on. God bless you. And just think about ways to prepare yourself for God to use you. And then also just check your heart, as I am too, for any pride, any areas in our life where we think that it's us, and when it's really God, because he's the one that has favor and mercy and gives us all the abilities that we have. So God bless you, and we'll see you next time on Breakthrough Truth. Thank you.